Welcome to Bucs Insider, presented by Verizon. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith, and we have some fun stuff to talk about. This is the best. We are both very excited to be here talking about this morning.
It just keeps getting better.
It does, and I mean, man, I had so much fun being at that game, and this is my 9th season now. I know you have many more on me than that. Just a few. But it was one of the most fun experiences I've had at a Bucs game in a while, I feel like.
It was great. The crowd was hyped. It was dramatic. And, you know, even with some of the things that didn't go well for the Bucs, like drop passes, it still was kind of exciting the whole way. And the back and forth and then the Bucs pulling away, it was kind of an emotional experience.
I agree. I think that there's so much in it. These Bucs fans are so invested in this, and especially with this whole underdog mentality, people counting us out at the beginning of the year. It's just, and I love, guys are now starting to talk about the idea of a revenge tour, being able to take on these teams they lost to earlier on in the season, right the ship, as we say, compared to that. So it's just been so fun, and especially I feel like offensively, after a couple games to end the regular season that hadn't been as big of a production offensively as, you know, the Packers and Jaguars games had been, to see them get off to a bit of a faster start, even though still that first drive touchdown is a bit elusive, but to get off to a much faster start offensively and some chunk plays was really exciting.
Yeah, and they scored on the first 4 offensive drives. Unfortunately, 3 of those were field goals, and more of those have to turn into touchdowns because for that reason, even though you felt like you were dominating the game, it was still close into the third quarter. And so obviously the Bucs want to get that ball in the end zone more. But I think scoring first, getting in a groove early allowed for Dave Canales to open up the playbook a little bit more, and you know, the defense could do some different things because Philadelphia got away from the run. So it was a really nice offensive start, and of course Baker Mayfield was
incredible. Yeah, and it was so great to see him. It just looked like he felt so much better, for one thing. The poor guy had been pretty beat up these last couple weeks. Yeah. And to me, I was not quite as terrified watching him scramble as I had been the couple weeks before. He just looked so much more like himself, as you see in this clip. He was feeling it.
Yes.
He was baking, and I just felt like he was in a groove. The offense was in a groove. Everybody seemed to be on the same page.
Yeah, and Baker really, I thought he was sharp. I thought he did the things that Dave Canales has been saying all season that he wants him to do, which was take the easy stuff, take the stuff that's schemed up and works, like something like that. Take that. But when there's times when it's the right time, you take the deep shot, and he did that as well. It's just we couldn't really hold on to it. So we got a lot of our big plays off of Yak, which we'll talk about in a bit. But Baker, really, his first playoff game for the Buccaneers, kind of like his first playoff game for the Browns, was a really, really good one. In fact, it was one of the best games a Buccaneer quarterback has had in the playoffs. I think we have a graphic for it, but I think he was there it is. Well, first of all, he's the first Bucs quarterback, and this is kind of surprising, to throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in the same playoff game. You would have thought at some point Tom did that, but it was never. He did have 300 games. He did have 3 touchdown games, but not at the same time. So you see, third best in passing yards, tied for the most passing touchdowns, and second in pass rating, only to Tom Brady in the Super Bowl.
Incredible.
So if you're just second behind Tom Brady, you've done a good job.
You've done pretty dang well, that's for sure. And, you know, with a great offensive game like that, typically you would imagine the stats are Mike Evans, 100 yards, Chris Godwin maybe 80-something or more, and that those are your main guys putting up numbers that let you have those kind of big games. That wasn't necessarily how it worked out this game. I know there were, like we talked about, a drop or two for Mike that I'm sure he would like to have back, or just passes that were just so close and almost there. But you had incredible production from guys like Palmer and Moore and Otten that isn't necessarily what you would imagine is the go-to for this offense. And I feel like that's so encouraging in the playoffs to know how many options you have.
Yeah, and before this game, I was making the point that because of what Philly's defense has given up and not given up, I felt like for us to win that game, either Mike or Chris or both of them would have to have a big game. And I think the Eagles thought the same thing because their defensive game plan obviously spent a lot of time trying to double those guys as much as possible. And when that happens, you're obviously going to open up parts of the field for the other guys that are on the field. And so you need your Trey Palmers and your Cade Ottens, who had a great game, and even David Moore, who's basically your 5th receiver. You need those guys to produce because they're making a point of taking Mike and Chris out, and they certainly did. And all those guys had big plays. One of the big things about that, though, was the Yak. They had 210 yards after the catch, like this K. Dotton, and that's partially because Baker Mayfield was so on point and getting it to these guys in positions where they could catch it in stride and run like that one. Now, Trey Palmer kind of did all of his on his own. He broke a tackle and then was shot out of a cannon between all those defenders. But just real nice production from the offense as a whole, and Baker going to the open man, even if it's not Mike and Chris.
And of course, to do all that, Baker needed some time.
Yeah.
Baker needed to be protected, and we knew that front can do some damage if you let them. And it felt like, even though he was sacked a few times, sometimes it was more of a coverage thing, or it wasn't directly just guys getting absolutely burned. And it felt like, especially on the edges, they were able to keep him pretty clean.
Yeah, well, if you think about those 4 sacks, the most damaging one was the one on 3rd and 1 when you were in field goal range and then you're out, and that came right up the middle. So there was some times where they got pressure up the middle, but they have 2 very good edge rushers in Hassan Reddick, who's going to the Pro Bowl, and Josh Sweat. And Hassan Reddick was mostly on Luke Gedeke, did not have a single pressure in that entire game. And Josh Sweat was mostly on Tristan Wirfs, like 25 snaps, I think, pass rush snaps, and only had 1 pressure. So to keep those 2 guys to 1 pressure was a huge part of that game that you don't really see in the stat book.
And will be very important this next week as well, I'm sure. So, all right, we talked a lot about the offense, but of course the defense. What an incredible game from them. And I felt like this was, as much as you talked about some of the, the creativity from Dave Canales and some of the things he was pulling out, same thing with Coach Bowles calling the defense, that this was a unique game, even by Bowles standards, which we are used to talking about the fact that he can bring some unique blitz packages, do a lot of different things. To see the ways he was using different defensive fronts, different guys in different roles in the secondary, that to be surprised in our position this late in the season is kind of fun.
Yeah, it was, you said this game was fun, and it started right at the beginning because we went out there on defense. And you're looking at this front going, what is this?
Yeah.
It's always fun when your coaches break out something you have never seen before, or at least haven't seen in a very long time. And we started the game and ended up playing about 12 or 14 snaps in a 6-man front. So usually if it's base, you have 3 down linemen like Cansey and Hall and Vita, and 2 edge rushers. Or if you're in sub packages, there's only 2 down linemen. We had 4 on the field because Will Golston was on there too. And that was because in this game, more than any other we've played in a long time, it was we have to stop the run first. They ran for 201 yards on us in the first game, and that was the difference.
Todd Bowles said, not today.
We're going to make them throw the ball to beat us. And it worked.
And especially when Jalen Hurts' finger is a little banged
that's
up
true too.
Even more. It's like that they were going to try to be like, all right, fine, like we're not having this happen again. That you're going to do something else.
You're going to beat us a different way if you're going to beat us, exactly.
Yeah, and then even seeing guys like Zion McCown, I mean, he's playing safety and nickel and corner and all over the place, which is really cool.
Yeah, and so when we started in that 6-man front, there was only 1 safety, and that was Antoine Winfield. So I mean, if you only have 1 safety on the field, it's good that he's the best one in football. But when we did do a second safety, a lot of times it was Zion, and then sometimes he was in the slot, sometimes he was playing corner. And Coach Bowles said on Monday that having that guy and using him in different roles is confusing for the offense. They don't know what you're doing because they haven't seen all these different looks before. So, and the fact that getting him on the field, as Coach Bowles said, means with Carlton and Jamel healthy, now you have your 3 best cover guys on the field at the same time.
And speaking of safety, Bucs got their first safety.
Yeah,
you see that transition,
good.
how
I
did
like
that there. So Anthony Nelson helped contribute to a safety. It may not show up quite as much on his stat sheet.
I know, I hate that.
Because it was technically penalty
This should count as a sack.
But we're just going to give it to him. Internally, we're going to decide that this was an Anthony Nelson safety.
Yeah, because he just tossed us away at the end, it doesn't count as a sack. Instead, it's intentional grounding in the end zone, which is a safety. And that's the first safety in Bucs postseason history.
It's incredible.
And it happened, as you saw, that was kind of a late developing play. That ball was, that's the best part about safeties is getting to do that sign over your head.
Yeah.
Look how long this play took to develop, and that's because the coverage was really good. Even right there at the end, he just had nowhere to throw it to. So give the coverage a lot of credit on that one, and then a guy like Anthony Nelson just playing through the whistle,
And another outside linebacker that had a great game, Shaq Barrett. I feel like he's a guy that, he hasn't necessarily gotten the stats that he has in years past, but he is still really producing in a lot of ways and playing a really important role on that defense.
Yeah, it's kind of like that play we just saw where Kalijah Cansey didn't get credit for anything on that play, but he's the one that flushed him out of the pocket. Well, Shaq was doing that a lot too. He had 6 quarterback pressures on 28 rushes in that game, and so that doesn't show up in the main stat page, but it really made a difference in terms of getting Jalen Hurts off his spot and disrupting the passing game. And so that's a 31.6 pass rating. There was a lot of good pass rushers in the Super Wild Card weekend over those 6 games. And as you can see, Shaq was third best in pressure percentage among guys that had at least 10 pass rush snaps. And you see Aiden Hutchinson.
I was going to say, how perfect of a transition now.
Yeah.
You see Aiden Hutchinson's name on there. That's going to be a very important person to keep an eye on. And these Lions, they've got some really impressive young guys, particularly on that defense.
Yeah, Aiden Hutchinson was the second overall pick in 2022, and he had a really nice rookie season, and this year even better, 11 sacks, and he's going to the Pro Bowl. And then this year, the Lions really had a great draft class, and we could talk about a lot of those guys. But on defense, Brian Branch, kind of a surprise that he lasted into the second round. He was a safety at Alabama, but they basically turned him into their nickel corner, and he's been a really, really good nickel corner for them. A couple interceptions and a bunch of passes defensed.
And then how about other guys on their defense that stand out to you?
Well, they did get a couple guys back from injury. Sorry, I got stuck there.
No,
for a
it's all right.
second.
No, you're good.
Their defense has been okay, not awesome, not nearly as good in a lot of the categories statistically as their offense, but they did get C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who's a big-time instigator, as we've already seen this week.
Yes, loved Baker's response to that.
That was really good. And then Alan McNeil, their starting defensive lineman, he's back. They both came back from injury reserve very recently, so they're a bit closer to full strength now.
And then I know their offense, that's been their bread and butter this year, and they have so many different ways they can attack you and beat you. And again, even other young guys, as you talked about, with them having a great draft class. I mean, Sam Laporta is just doing incredible things, and Jared Goff has been a bit of a Bucs killer in some other matchups, and I think it's just going to be really interesting to see, knowing how well the Bucs defense played in this last game and seeing how they're able to do so many things at this point in the season with having that firm grasp of Bowles' system. This is a fun kind of strength on strength idea.
Yeah, it really is going to be. If you look at that Detroit Lions offense, they're top 5 in just about every category, rushing and passing. They have the second most passing yards. They're top 5 in scoring and total yards. Sacks allowed because their offensive line is fantastic. Interception percentage is low. The red zone, they're fantastic in the red zone. And they have, and we talked about this in our preview of this game, I didn't even realize until I started looking at the stats, and it's rather amazing. They have 4 guys with 10 or more touchdowns scored. I don't know if I've seen that before.
It's amazing.
Or I just don't remember seeing that before. So you got obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he's probably the most dangerous guy. And then you mentioned Sam Laporta, who did things that rookie tight ends almost never do, including 10 touchdowns. And then both of the running backs, Montgomery and Gibbs, are over 10 touchdowns. So it's not like, hey, okay, we're going to play this team, we're going to take away their one guy, and then what are they going to do? How do you defend all those guys? It's not easy. And Jared Goff, as you noted, is playing probably the best football of his career right now. And if we weren't going into Detroit to play them, I'd be kind of happy about that, because it's kind of cool to see that team getting some success, and Jared Goff, who basically was a throw-in in the Stafford trade and is now doing so well for Detroit. So it's a really difficult offense to face. The Bucs have their hands full.
Credit out for them for sure. And then you know what the good news is, though, this is the 8th straight rematch of a regular season game for a playoff game. It's crazy. And we have seen that when you give, especially Coach Bowles and his defense, a second shot at people, how well that seems to go. And so it's just so interesting to me to think about the fact that this has been such a consistent thing, and where there's been a lot of success for the Bucs in playing someone they already played this year.
It's just a weird coincidence. And if we win this game, the next one will be against a team we already played this season. But I mean, the 8 straight playoff games against the team you faced in the regular season, and those are in chronological order now. A couple of them we had won. Like, we beat Green Bay pretty handily and then beat them again in the NFC Championship game. But a lot of these, you see the Saints, the Chiefs is a big one. How Todd Bowles changed his defensive game plan between those 2 games was a big part of the story. And then, of course, this past week, we got the win against a team that beat us pretty handily early in the year. So that's the same thing we're facing against Detroit. 20-6 isn't exactly a blowout, but the Bucs couldn't do much on offense, couldn't run the ball, and I feel like, as the coaches and players have been saying all week and last week as well, this is a different team than it was in September and October.
Yeah, that Rams game is the only one you see where there was a loss both times.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show how much in this league it is really hard to beat a team twice.
True.
That you just learn a lot about people. So I think it's a great sign that, hey, you know what? We may have lost that first game this regular season, but now we get a second shot at it. All right, that's going to do it for us on this edition of Bucs Insider, presented by Verizon. Thank you so much for being with us, and we hope you have a blast watching this next playoff game, and stay tuned for all the coverage here on Buccaneers.com.